The following presentation is brought to you without commercial interruption by our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. When you can't make it out to Gettysburg, we want to bring Gettysburg to you, and we can only do that with more support from our listeners. So please, consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg, where you will find our premium content made exclusively for our patrons. That's patreon.com/addressinggettysburg.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Okay. Should we say, you got it on? Are you ready?
Go ahead. You want to say something?
Well, I still got 2 minutes.
Tim, why don't you tell
2 minutes
where this is being recorded?
Yeah, I should do that.
Yeah. Oh, no. Film before a live studio.
Oh, yeah. Very good. I can't do it on call. I have to wait for the moment.
This is the cheers, I guess. Cheers, not call.
Excuse yourself.
Tim fills the role of Cliff.
Well, you know,
Okay, so it's time to start the program.
Yeah, I want your picture.
Now, as we go along in our program, if you need a drink or something like that, feel free to yell for one of the servers to bring you another drink. We want to make sure that you are happily, consuming your beverages. Well, welcome again to the Farnsworth House in Gettysburg for our Sunday night history program. And I know that a few weeks ago I said I wouldn't do a program tonight. Sam and I were thinking about going to the Packers game, but he had a Christmas concert today, so that didn't happen. So we decided to do the program. And I had this program that I had made a while back. I delivered it to the Pittsburgh Civil War Roundtable by Zoom. We were doing a lot of roundtable programs, not live, but over the internet. And, they didn't record it or anything like that, but it was done for the members of the roundtable. And I don't know, maybe like 40 people watched it. And so this discovery I made of the Elliott Burial Map occurred, I would say, just at the beginning of COVID. So, of course, I don't remember how long that lasted, it seems. Maybe it was in the middle of COVID. But anyway, this discovery I'm going to talk about that I made occurred in, I believe, it's funny I didn't write down the date, March of 2020. Okay, so basically, I'll talk about the discovery and the process that led to the discovery and some of the interesting things that happened that we know about the map that I discovered. How about that? So basically, the story starts with the Battle of Gettysburg. A lot of men were killed in the battle. Now, a lot of other men died in the battle, died in the hospitals around the town after the battle was over. But there were thousands of bodies on the battlefield. And it took about a week to bury the bodies. The bodies were buried first by the Northern Army and the Southern Army while they were still in the field. And then after the battle, there were burial crews of the Northern Army, and Confederate prisoners were detained to bury Southern soldiers. The Northern soldiers were pretty much buried in individual graves. And if the soldier's identity was known, a board was placed in front of the grave telling who the soldier was. And, of course, one of the things about the American Civil War is usually the burial crews are made up of men from other units than the people they're burying. So they're not being buried by their direct comrades after the battle. They're being buried by other people who don't know them and don't know their names. So most people, even if they're Northern soldiers, are buried in unknown graves. The Southern soldiers were just buried in pits or trenches all around the battlefield. About 2 weeks after the battle. And, I think we're not sure of the exact date. At least I've never seen a reference to the exact date. Governor Andrew Curtin arrives in Gettysburg, and he visits the battlefield. What you should know is the state of Pennsylvania, the state legislature had already made preparations to, they already agreed, or I guess they passed some legislation that allowed them to pay money for individual soldiers from Pennsylvania to be brought home from the battlefield and buried in cemeteries in their town or wherever their family wanted the body buried. So Pennsylvania had already assumed the responsibility of returning dead Pennsylvania soldiers to their loved ones. Well, Governor Curtin came here, saw all these soldiers who were killed in the battle, and said, well, since we're going to bear a lot of expense anyway, why don't we just buy a plot of land near the battlefield and bury the Pennsylvania soldiers in it? He spoke to governors of other states, New Jersey and Maryland, and eventually Ohio and New York, and they all agreed this was a really good idea, and the states put up money and formed a committee that would be responsible for the Soldiers' National Cemetery. Andrew Curtin is on the right here in this photograph. On the left is a young attorney in Gettysburg named David Wills. And David Wills had been locally the head of the political establishment that helped Governor Curtin win the gubernatorial election in October of 1860. So locally, he was a representative for David Wills, and David Wills appointed, Governor Curtin appointed David Wills as the head of the agent for the Soldiers' National Committee, the Soldiers' National Cemetery Committee. And of course, on November 19, 1863, 4 months after the battle, there was a dedication ceremony in which Edward Everett was the keynote speaker and Abraham Lincoln made a few appropriate remarks. Now, what you might not know, though, is that Andrew Curtin was also responsible for a lot of the burials that were taking place at that time. It's got to be there. So here's a letter from an article, I should say, from the Philadelphia Press on July 17, 1863. And I didn't highlight it, but I want you to take note that in the end of the first paragraph it says, a map has been made of the battlefield, which shows the exact locality of every grave. We do not have any papers from David Wills pertaining to his activities on the Soldiers' National Cemetery Committee. We don't have anything dealing with, we don't have his correspondence with Governor Curtin or any of these letters. It would be fascinating, and it's possible that someday something will surface and we'll have access to this. But the important thing to know is from several sources, not this, the least of which, we know that they created a working map of all the burials on the battlefield within, 2 weeks after the battle. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people understand. Just because we don't have access to this and no one's ever seen it, this thing did exist. Okay. So, the other story is this Elliott Burial Map. And the National Park Service got a copy of the Elliott Burial Map early on in their existence. And I'm going to guess it was like in the 1940s and 1950s, someone at the park became aware that at the National Archives, the Elliott Burial Map existed. And so this map was recorded, and a tracing of the map was made. And the tracing of this map is still in the park archives. You can still see the tracing of the map. And early on, people like William Frastinito made their own copy, sat there and made a copy of the map for their own records, and also Gray Coco had made a copy of the map. So, and at some point, the licensed battlefield guides realized that the original map was in the National Archives, and in the early 1990s, I believe it was, one of the tour guides got a copy of it, made copies for the other tour guides, and in the 1990s, we all had copies of this map. And this was a map that showed burials around the battlefield. And it says on the map, this is the south part of the map, it says that it was surveyed by this S.G. Elliott. No one knew who this S.G. Elliott was. No one knew much about the map. And I think most people speculated that this map was generated shortly after the battle, simply because of the fact that it showed burials prior to the bodies being moved to the National Cemetery. Now, at the Library of Congress, they also have Elliott Burial Maps, and they actually have two different versions of the map. So if we count the one at the National Archives, there are three different versions of this burial map. And I just wanted to point out the differences between some of these burial maps. The note on the top left of the map I'm in blue. I circled the note I want to read about the map. It's the same on both maps. And then you might notice that there are three areas where the maps are different. These are the two maps of the Library of Congress. On the map to the left, you might notice at the top of it, there is a plot of the Soldiers' National Cemetery showing you where the men are buried. So obviously it's prepared after that. And the one on the right does not have that. The one on the left, you might notice the printer's name is up in the middle of the map, and on the one on the right, the printer's name is down the bottom of the map, and the one on the left, there's a description of the battle. So think about that. You know, this map we know now is printed in 1864. It is a really, really, really early version of an account of the battle. And to just show you some of those close up, here's the plan of the National Cemetery as shown on there with all the plots, and it's pretty accurate. So you can see there. And here's the description, the sketch of the Battle of Gettysburg. And there's a letter on the map, an explanation of the map. And David Wills, I wonder if I put that on there. David Wills mentions that the map is an accurate portrayal of the battlefield, and he says specifically that it shows the burials. So David Wills, who was in charge of the committee that had a map prepared 2 weeks after the battle, somehow is involved in these maps with this guy named S.G. Elliott, who we don't know who he is, and we don't know much about him, at least until more recently. Also, there's a note on this map that I take issue with. I just wanted to point out that there's two different maps. And one of them, it says, is printed in New York. And the other one is printed in Philadelphia. So why is there two different maps published in two different cities by two different printers? And then you might notice the thing I take issue with, it says, by transit and chain, meaning that this S.G. Elliott came to Gettysburg and surveyed the battlefield with surveying equipment. I highly doubt that he did that. At the moment we have no evidence he's even ever here. I think he took a map that someone else drew, and he redrew the map and ended up printing it in the fashion that the map is printed that we see it. But they did add this by transit and chain. The reason I doubt that is because there are features on the map that are common to other maps, like the 1858 wall map, and also it's not that accurate of a survey. So I doubt if he's doing transit and chain. I doubt if he's actually surveying. And the third thing is, S.G. Elliott, as I'll describe, is a charlatan.
He's not a civil engineer?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sure he is. That's just one of his many talents. Did I put this? This is mine.
Yeah, take it.
Yeah. So, here's David Will's explanation. And notice, and I don't know why other people didn't really look at this very closely before, but on the map it says Gettysburg, June 10th, 1864. And this message is on both maps. So obviously this thing is not published until after this explanation is given on the map, right? And you can see it says the undersigned commissioners of the states, meaning the managers of the Soldiers National Cemetery, take pleasure in recommending to the public Elliott's map of the battlefield of Gettysburg. And he talked about how reliable it is. And then it also exhibits with entire accuracy the location and design of the Soldiers National Cemetery. So I think that statement's put on the one that shows the cemetery. But so that's the explanation. Okay. Now the park has the Elliott Burial Map in the Foundation's museum. And someone, I don't know who it was, wrote this caption. And it says, the landscape holds thousands of temporary graves, la 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 la. And he says, create this map of the dead of Gettysburg created by S.G. Elliott of Philadelphia in July of 1863. Well, first of all, Elliott's not from Philadelphia, and it wasn't created in July of 1863. And if they just read it, they would know that. But someone prepared that caption for it. And I think, again, a lot of people thought this was a map created at the time. So, this is where I come into the picture. Oh, well, not yet. I won't bring myself in yet. My colleague at the Adams County Historical Society, I like to call my colleague, but technically he's my boss, Andrew Dalton, was really interested in this map, and he hit me with 20 questions one day about it. And as I often do with the 20 questions, my answers were, I don't know. And I've said this hundreds of times, and I think it holds true. There's so many historians that are afraid to say they don't know. So they go into elaborate detail. And, sometimes you just don't know things. And there's so many things I didn't know about this map. So he said, I'm going to figure out who S.G. Elliott is. So he started in on it, and he used a bunch of different resources, and I was very proud of him. And he found that S.G. Elliott is born in New Hampshire. And with the gold rush, he moved to California. And he became a civil engineer. Now, he got his engineering license and surveying license in California. So I guess the gold rush didn't pan out too well for him. You know how it didn't pan out.
Too well. Thank
you. Well, that does come from the gold rush. I didn't know if you guys knew that. So here he became the county surveyor in Auburn, California in 1858. And he actually was involved in several projects in the railroad venue. But it seems early on that there's a lot of lawsuits. You can find his name in a few lawsuits. He proposes railroads. He collects money to lay out the railroads, and maybe with the intention of never actually designing the railroad. So he becomes involved in this scheme over the California-Oregon Railroad. And he is, let's say, sponsored by some investors to come to Washington, D.C. and try to get congressional help, monetary assistance from the government to help the private investors build this railroad. And Andrew was actually able to find another Elliott map, the only other one we found that has his name on it, of the Central California Railroad that he was working and surveying on. And you can see, S.G. Elliott, C.E., civil engineer, 1860. So S.G. Elliott comes to the east to try to get somebody in Congress to support his project for this railroad that never actually occurs. And he's lots of the investors end up suing him over losing their money in this investment as time goes on. So Question?
It says that he was looking for investors to just do a survey
Yeah.
of the railroad.
Yeah, and then he did a survey on this railroad. And I don't know if do we have a survey of the California-Oregon Railroad, the other railroad he's working on.
Okay.
But he's then becomes, hey, we can't raise enough money here to complete it, so we'll, pay my expenses. I'll go east. We'll get some congressional help from our representatives, from California and Oregon. And I've never looked into the congressional record to see, again, this is all pretty new that we've tied this guy in with this other stuff, to see if there's any mention of him in Washington, D.C., in some of the correspondence of Edward Baker, for instance. Of course, the war is going to interrupt, is going to be involved in the middle of all this. So, what's the other? The other senator from Oregon is Lane. So, isn't it Baker and Lane at the beginning of the war, the two senators? I just happen to know that. I know. That's off the wall. So, and Oregon becomes a state in 1859. So this is all happening around the time when Congress is giving money for such projects. So anyway, we know that S.G. Elliott comes to New York in January 1863. And here's an article. January 1864, he comes to New York City. And here's an article, and again, it's from a California newspaper in April of 1864, April 2nd, and it mentions that Mr. S.G. Elliott, engineer of the road from Washington, D.C., is writing a letter to the paper. He's working on, he's referred to a committee on the Pacific Railroad. He has confidence that a favorable report will be passed on to the House of Representatives. And then, I was going to say, is this the article at the bottom? At the top. No, it's just an article about the California and Oregon Railroad. So we know he's there. Now, here are the two articles that Andrew found that just blew his mind. These are July 20th, 1864, and August 1st, 1864. One's from a California newspaper, and one's from a Philadelphia newspaper. So we know this is the same guy. If we just had mentioned in the Philadelphia newspaper, it would, you won't be able to tie him in so well. But they mention that he is working on a map showing the location of the Union and Rebel breastworks where the batteries were planted, and also the localities of all the graves of the killed soldiers from the battlefield of Gettysburg. So it mentions that in the article. And on the right, it says, in August, a good, we might say, the only reliable map, the battlefield of Gettysburg, is that made by S.G. Elliott of California while on a visit to this state. So we know, we theorize, that in 1864, Elliott comes to Washington, D.C., somehow visits Gettysburg or talks to someone from Gettysburg, and David Wills allows him access to the hand-drawn maps, or whatever they are, because we had never seen them, of the town and the area where there are burials after the battle that he created. And he, being a civil engineer, is able to make them into one large, coherent map that then is printed and offered for sale. And so that's the story we have on that.
It says scale is 7 inches per mile. The original must be bigger than...
Yeah, and then again, I have seen, I've only seen copies of, I have not seen the originals. But the originals, 2 of them are at the Library of Congress, and one is at the National Archives. I may have seen one of the originals when I was down there one time. And the copies we have at the park are copies made from the original. And they're pretty sizable maps.
Okay.
But, that's a good point. I've never, looked at the scale of the map and said to myself, oh, it's this big.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty big map. Okay. So, here's where I came into the story. So, Andrew is very proud of himself. Andrew, he should be, for figuring out who S.G. Elliott is and when the maps were made and all. And he asked me, he wrote an article about the Elliott Burial Map that he was going to get published. And he thought, really cool stuff. And he asked me to read his article. And I read the article. And I said to him, there's only 3 copies of the map known. 2 at the Library of Congress and 1 at the National Archives. If the map is printed, it would be sold. The one article said that it was being offered for sale. Someone would have bought the map, and the map would exist in private collections somewhere. And so one day, I think it was a Sunday, it had to be a Sunday morning, I was sitting at home, and I decided I would look on the internet and see if I could find an Elliott Burial Map in a private collection. And so I know lots of places to look for maps. I looked on every auction site I could find. I just Googled S.G. Elliott and different forms of the name. Nothing. Nothing was coming up at all. One was printed in Philadelphia. I tried the Philadelphia Free Library. Now, when you try these repositories, you can't just put the name on the internet search bar and hope that it comes up. No, most of these libraries have finder's guides. So you have to go to the library, you have to go to their finder's guide, and then you have to search within the library search bar. You won't find this by just Googling on the internet. Ironically, the New York Public Library is a little bit upset with me for announcing that they didn't know they had this in their collection. So they have now put it everywhere. And all you have to do is push Elliott, Antietam, and this map will come up. So anyway, I am very familiar with the New York Public Library's digital collection. I was probably already a thorn in their side. I mean, I can understand, because I work at an archives, and we have lots of cool stuff in our archives. So you make your stuff available on the internet. Other people find the stuff on your internet. They recognize the significance of something because you're looking at 1 million documents, and you don't see that one of them is extremely rare and no one has seen it, and you're not aware of it, and someone else points it out to you. It must be slightly irritating. So I understand all that. Now, I made other discoveries at the New York Public Library through their digital collection, and God bless them. They got a grant from the state of New York 10 years ago, and they digitized all kinds of really cool stuff. And the team of people who are being paid to digitize stuff are probably not thinking about how someone is going to figure out they digitize it, get into the site, search for stuff, and find really cool stuff. But here's their search bar. And you see this? Look at this. Look at this, what it says at the top. 914,000 items digitized. 914,000. And when I say I've used this before, I put in the term Gettysburg and looked at every single item that came up. And I located about, I guess it's almost 10 years ago, this collection of United States Sanitary Commission photographs. And what no one realized was that in 1865, when a stereo card company got a hold of Matthew Brady's photographs and Alexander Gardner's photographs, they took the original negative and they cracked off the ends of the negative, and then so they could fit in a stereo card that they were publishing. So the National Archives has the original Alexander Gardner negatives that you can go online and see, but the ends of them have been cracked off.
They literally
cut. They cut the negative off on the right and the left. The New York Public Library, unbeknownst to them, had prints made from the negatives prior to them being cracked off on the end. And this might not seem important. This might seem trivial. But now, in this view from the cemetery gatehouse, you can see the tree on East Cemetery Hill. You can see much farther to the right and the left. And I started showing people this, and of course the one I'm more famous for is I found that they had a print of the 3 Confederate sharpshooters that showed much more to the right and much more above in the sky. They had really cropped this one when they then started making stereo cards of it in 1865. So these are prints made from negatives before they're reduced in size. Now, they might not show us anything to start on. This one was particularly interesting to me. A variant of the famous Fonnestock view on Middle Street. And in this view, you can see way off to the left, and you can actually see the brick sidewalk along Middle Street. You can see a street lamp, and you can see down Middle Street, and you can see some of the houses along Middle Street that you cannot see in the other version of the view. So again, I think this is kind of cool. You know, one of my favorite discoveries was they had 4 rarely seen prints from Camp Letterman. This one had been known before, but only from a lithograph made off of the print. These are probably done by Weaver in 1863, October. And here, well, maybe earlier with the leaves on the trees. But this one had never been seen. So these are Camp Letterman views that we did not know existed. Now, I know Camp Letterman's not the most exciting thing.
When you're saying Weaver, you're referring to the Gettysburg photographer?
Oh, Weaver, Samuel Weaver, yes. Yes. And his son ended up moving to Hanover, Peter Weaver.
Why did they take their farmhouse down? I thought that's a historical site.
You mean Hunterstown?
Yep.
That's in Strabane Township. We don't preserve history in Strabane Township. Did I tell you that? Years ago, our local preservation group was so distraught about Strabane tearing down a house and putting up a Wendy's, at the Walmart site, that they wanted to put a big they were close to putting up a big billboard in Strabane Township with a bulldoze on it. Just because they were so Strabane Township is not very friendly to preservation. And what he's talking about is a home that was owned by Samuel Weaver out on the Hunterstown Road fell into disrepair and was torn down. Okay, so here's another view of the doctor. I forget what his name is. Who's a medical person? They probably know. Winslow? What's his name? But anyway, he's a well-known individual with his wife. Is it that Holstein guy? I forget which one that is. And then I go forward, and you can see that one too. So there were 4 Camp Letterman views. 2 of them we knew about because they were reproduced as drawings in different magazines and stuff. But here, you can see that they're in that site. So anyway, so what I wanted to do, this was my sole intention. I wanted to find another copy in someone's collection of the Elliott Burial Map of Gettysburg and look at it and see what it said and what version of the map it was. That's all I was doing. So I found in their site S.G. Elliott, and I downloaded it. It was in a high resolution. I had to download it and wait for it to download, and it popped up. And I said, okay, well, there's the Hagerstown Road. And I started sliding the map over when I saw the Hagerstown Road, and nothing was making sense to me at all. And I just remember sitting in front of the computer for like 20 seconds and looking at the map, and then I saw the Smoketown Road, and I'm like, what's going on here? And of course I realized that this is not the battlefield of Gettysburg, that I was looking at a burial map of the battlefield of Antietam. And I tell you, I know enough to know that no one has ever seen this map before. Let's say this. No one who knows anything about the Battle of Antietam has ever seen this map. So immediately, I went to the cornfield.
Oh, my favorite place.
And that's what the cornfield looked like on this map.
Those mass graves.
and my mind was blown. You know. So now what to do? What to do? You know? So I'm thinking, you know, I'm going through my mind, I'm thinking, am I stupid? You know, has this been discussed in a book? Now I should tell you, I've read every book on the Battle of Antietam that's come out any time recently. And I also I've written a book on Antietam. And I'm good friends with the park rangers in Antietam. And I know a lot about Antietam. And no one knows anything about this map. So I called Andrew because, of course, Andrew knew that I was looking for stuff to help him with his article. And, you know, I got to tell you, I think Andrew was a little upset because he thought he had this really cool article and my discovery kind of just blew away, you know, what some of his research. Although he did write his article on the scoundrel, I think he calls it. And it's very good.
Where can you show the cornfield in the graves of the
They don't actually,
in the
they actually don't show the cornfield there, but obviously the cornfield, you know, that stream, you see the stream run across the top of the map, and just to the left of it is the Miller farm.
So what would be the Texan graves?
So they don't know if they show any Texas graves on here, but you know, just like the other map, the Confederates are shown as single slashes, so they're just all there in the middle. Probably like right here. You know, right there. And a lot of these soldiers here are from Sedgwick's assault on the West Woods. So it's a mixture of stuff too. And of course, you know, the ground's covered over, so. But I don't, you know, off the top of my head, I don't think a Texas soldier's mentioned on the map. I'll talk about what's on the map in a minute. Here I turned this. So here we're at the West Woods, and we're looking east is at the top of the map. And you can see, if you know where the Philadelphia Brigade Memorial is, it's in the middle of this this grove right here. And this is all the Union and Confederate soldiers associated with that attack. And again, I believe on the map that we're going to talk about in a moment, the crosses, with the line with the slash across them are north, and then these are the southern graves. Just the solid lines. So what I did was I called Gary. And I remember Gary was walking at the time. He wasn't home, but he walked home. He opened up this map, and he said, wow, we have to do something about this. We have to announce this. But we wanted to, I'll tell you what I didn't want to do. I'm not going to write a book about Antietam. I didn't want to be one of these people that makes a discovery, and then they hide it, and then they write a book about it, and then they tell people, well, you'll have to wait for my book to come out. You know, all that irritates me. But I hear that over and over again from people, like they covet and hide their secret. So what I did was I told Gary, let's call the park ranger, Brian Barras, at Antietam, that we're good friends with. So we called the historian at the Antietam National Battlefield. And I gave him the link, and he got on the map, and his mind was blown. He had trouble talking for a few minutes. And as luck would have it, Antietam Visitor Center is closed at the moment. You guys know that? And they're building a new museum. And Brian said, wow, we have a panel, and we were thinking about putting something about Antietam dead on it, and we don't know what to put on it. You don't mind if we use this map when you walk in as our main exhibit? So this map is going to be on a full-scale wall, like 6 foot tall, 4 foot wide, when you walk in the new Antietam Museum. And he was enamored by the fact that it shows all the dead on the battlefield. See how people put out the little bags with the candles on them? Yeah. And you go around the battlefield and you drive past the bags? Well, this is they talk about how many people died, and boom, there you see it. All the dead from the battlefield laid out right there in front of you. Question?
Well, I was just going to ask what they had before, did they have any kind of representation of where the graves were?
No.
Nothing?
So, and Brian told me, the historian at Antietam, told me that he had often been jealous of Gettysburg because we have the Elliott Burial Map. And so, theoretically now, before I'm going to take a little break here and pull our raffle tickets. But before the break, let me just mention that Antietam, you know what? I don't even know what my point was going to be. I lost my point.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
You were saying Brian was
jealous
about
yeah. But, you know, he'd been looking for something an illustration to put on the map to highlight the fact, or in the museum, to highlight the fact of all the dead. And just the number of slashes. And let me just tell you, there's 5,844 slashes on the map.
You counted. You didn't count them.
Yeah, well, I did not. That's why they're interned. I'm sure Gary, I don't know who counted, but I think Civil War Trust printed that in their magazine article on it. So I'm guessing that Gary had an intern that did that. Yes, he counted the slashes. You can download this now. Everyone in this room can go to the New York Public Library. You don't even have to go there anymore. You just put S.G. Elliott Antietam, New York Public Library, and it'll pop up, and you can download it on your computer, and you can look at all the slashes to your heart's content.
If this were printed in the size it was originally, how big is it?
Well, I think, let's see. I think it's about almost 3.5, 4 feet tall.
Okay.
By like 3 feet wide. So I think, and you can, you know, like also Civil War Trust or American Battlefield Trust, as they are now known, is offering this for sale on their website, and you can buy it. And I think they want $60 for a copy of it. But it's not a big copy of it, it's a smaller copy. You have to use a magnifying glass.
I saw a national major article come up on my phone about this. It was recent back then. And I noticed that your name wasn't even mentioned at all. Such a modest man, I tell you.
I got enough attention over it. So what we did was we waited a couple months. We got the map together. We had some historians. We let some people in on it. Dennis Fry knew about it. Tom Clemens knew about it, who I love and respect as a serious Antietam scholar. And we let Keith Snyder, who's a historian at Antietam, in on it, and Brian. And there were a few other people that knew about it, like Andrew. And we organized an announcement, and we had a Zoom presentation, and I told the story of how I found it. And then all these historians oohed and ahed about how great it was. I did get some interesting people criticizing me about it, making such a big deal about it, because they said, like, I didn't go there to the archives to find it. Somebody else just put it on the internet. I just happened to cross it. So I think they were just jealous. But I did get, I should say, the next day, the Civil War Trust released it, and I think I saw my name in like 70 newspapers all across the country.
I was going to say, it sounds like another Anita.
Yeah, it wasn't, I don't think I didn't get a lot of publicity from it myself.
Of these two maps, the Gettysburg and Antietam map, how accurate are these?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about after the break. So we'll hold that thought. Okay, so now, you know what I need, Andy? I need the tickets. He's bringing them. Okay, so we have, as usual, we have some gift certificates, and we have some Farnsworth House books. And Andy's already mixed them up, so I don't. It's not my fault if two people decide each other to get the same one. So gift certificate.
Never won.
This one says Patrick on it. No, it doesn't. Okay, last three numbers, 943.
Oh, that's me. Finally won something, guys. I finally won. Thank you.
It's beer money. Okay. Here is another. Let's see what this one is. 5, 4.
And while we go on break, during the Tim Smith Winter Lecture Series about the Antietam Elliott Map, we'd like to remind you that this takes place every Sunday, almost, at the Farnsworth House in Sweeney's Tavern. So next time you come to Gettysburg, make sure you figure it in your schedule to take off on Monday so that you can stay through Sunday and see Tim's lectures. They're fun, they're entertaining, and they're enlightening. So, there.
Two from the same table. That's got to be.
Tell Pat
Okay, we're back. Matt's taping. Okay. So, one of the things that interesting about the map, I'll tell you a little bit about the differences between the map, but one of the things I wanted to look at is the sunken lane at Antietam, and you can see the sunken lane and you can see the bodies at the sunken lane. And we have an illustration of the burials at the sunken lane that was drawn, I think his name is Frank Schell, a correspondent after the battle, and it shows all the bodies being buried on the, would that be, the west side, the east side of the sunken lane. And we're actually, in our book on Antietam, Gary and I, Antietam Then and Now, we kind of lined this up. I don't know if a lot of people tried to line it up before, but actually it's showing the sunken lane is coming across in the middle of the photograph, and then where you're looking down the lane, that's where it turns, and then that other part of the lane that runs off is the lane that runs out to the Roulette Farm. And the Roulette Farm lane is not shown on the Elliott map, but we're talking about, we're looking down this part of the lane, and they don't show that the Roulette lane would be coming off like that, but we're looking down this stretch of the lane. It's just fascinating, and you see how the burials are predominantly on the east side of the lane.
Where's the tower sitting?
I believe, off the top of my head, on this map, I believe the tower is right there.
Okay.
Yeah. So here now we have the two maps. The Elliott Burial Map of Gettysburg, the Elliott Burial Map of Antietam. They look pretty much the same. They use the same configuration. And it's interesting that the map of the Battle of Antietam, it says, is published in New York. So again, the Philadelphia one seems to be kind of an anomaly. And the map of the battlefield of Antietam, you see published in New York, matches the same company that does the one of Gettysburg. I still would suggest that the map, for whatever reason, never got sold. That they made them, they advertised them, the proof copies of the maps were made, but I don't think the map was ever distributed. I cannot imagine for the life of me that the map was printed in any kind of quantity, and yet none of the maps exist in any private collections anywhere. I mean, I just think, it just seems to me, because you know how rare books are. If you have rare books on this subject or that subject, we have really rare copies of, Gettysburg books. You can find copies of the book. If they printed them, they would have printed 500 at least. You would be able to find them somewhere, and they just don't exist, except in, these 4 places now. So there is a key to the maps, and we mentioned, I see, the Union graves are cross, the rebel graves are single line, the what do you call that, that designation on the typewriter? The horses is a squiggly line for horses, and then they show breastworks and lunettes for artillery and rifle pits, and on the Antietam map, there is something else added that's not on the Gettysburg map, and that's batteries. Now, also, the Antietam map is 1864 also. It was printed in 1864. So, clearly, someone, maybe with the Antietam Cemetery Commission or the Battlefield Commission, has given Elliott access to a map that was done after the battle that showed the burials, and then he redrew it. Now we know that. We know that he didn't go to Antietam and draw this map based on the burials. The reason we know that is because, for instance, there are people identified by name on the map, and one of them is a guy named Stetson, who was in the 59th New York. That's pretty famous. He's related to the family that made the Stetson hat, you know. And we have a specific account about the family coming and getting his body and removing it from the Antietam battlefield like 2 weeks after the battle, and then returning it to New York. So he could not have been there in 1864 at that spot buried for him to see. He had already been removed from the battlefield.
Do we know of a burial map that exists for Antietam similar to the
No. So just like the Gettysburg burial map, we don't have access to David Will's papers. And who was ever in charge of the Antietam cemetery, and you know theirs was a little bit later that it got organized and bodies removed. Whoever's there must have access to this map because they're getting ready for the reburials of Northern soldiers into the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Antietam. And he probably spoke to someone from that committee. Who knows how it worked? Maybe he spoke to the Antietam guy first near Washington, and then they told him about David Wills, and he got a hold of these maps and then reproduced these maps. But again, with the Antietam one, we do not have the map or any maps that this map is based upon.
So, and there's no specific date on either the Antietam or
as to when what they're based on, except 1864 when they're printed. Right. And then we know he was here. In the newspaper, they mentioned 1864. So we know they're from 1864.
But you don't know which one was printed first.
And we don't know which one was printed first. We don't have any mention in the newspaper at all of the Antietam map. Besides the map itself, nothing is known of the Antietam map. So I've not been able to find an article that says, hey, Elliott is surveying the Antietam battlefield. Now,
the mark for the dead horses, is that a mark per horse, or is it per 10, or what?
It's one horse.
One horse.
Okay. And just so you know, and I don't remember the Gettysburg number, but on the Antietam burial map, there are 269 horses shown.
Wow.
And this is one thing that's bothered me over the years. Did you ever hear a battlefield guide? I don't know, Jim, when you're asked about it, say that 10,000 horses were killed in the battle? Or 5,000 horses were killed in the battle? Well, Jim Clowes found a document in the National Archives, and it said that the Union Army, after the Gettysburg campaign, needed to replace 2,500 horses. And that's how the 5,000 figure came about. Well, if the Northern Army lost 2,500 horses, well, probably the Southerners did too. But I always like to point out that that's during the campaign. That's marching from Virginia to Pennsylvania and marching from Pennsylvania back to Virginia. All the estimates of horses on the battlefield are in the hundreds. So I think that, and I don't mind doing it because, you're talking to kids mostly about it because they love to talk about burning dead horses and stuff. But there's nothing I like talking about more with them is the destruction of the horses. And, little things like, every horse had a name. Or how did they get the horses into piles to light on fire anyway? Live horses dragged their dead bodies into the pile. Things like that. But I tend to believe that there's hundreds of horses killed in the battle and not thousands. But on the Elliott burial map, they showed 269 horses. And they did bury a lot of the horses and then also burn some horses. So even if there's 1,000 horses, that's a lot.
Tim, the map, the Elliott map in the New York collection, do you know anything about the provenance of that map as to where it came from?
No. And it would be nice. It would be nice if I was friends with the people there that I could say, hey, do you have accession papers on that I could look at? I think it came, my reading of it in their description, it came with a collection of other maps. They have a huge collection of maps. And it's one of like 1,000 maps that was given to them and collected by them by a map, a mapping repository. So I don't think they have a good idea. It wasn't given by one person or anything like that. So what I want to mention here is this is another remarkable thing and the difference about the maps. I would suggest that the stuff in the map, the items on the map, suggest the Gettysburg one was done first and Antietam was done later. Because there are improvements on the Antietam map over the Gettysburg map. For instance, on the Gettysburg map, for some odd reason, there's like, I forget the number off the top of my head, 14, 16, maybe it's 18 individuals shown on the map. And here is up near Blocker's Knoll or Barlow's Knoll, and you see some Georgians are listed by name on the map. On the Elliott Burial Map, there are 50 individuals by name. 50. And of course, as soon as we got a hold of the map, we started researching some of these individuals. Some of them had been moved off the Antietam battlefield within a few weeks and were buried in their hometown cemeteries. So again, the information on the map is not from 1864. It's got to be from right after the battle. But here is, what am I showing here? I see a creek. I guess this is some old 8th Connecticut. We're way down along Antietam Creek. Okay. The other thing that's interesting is on the Gettysburg burial map, the horses seem kind of scattered. Look at all the artillery horses shown on the Elliott Burial Map of Gettysburg from the artillery reserve along the Wheatfield Road and up near the Peach Orchard, and look at the horses around the Trossel farm. You know, there's a reason that attracted the attention of photographer Alexander Gardner. And on the Antietam map, all the horses are dragged into the same spots. Do you see that? Yeah. So there, I guess it does not important exactly where we are here, but you can see all the horses there, I think around the visitor center. Don't remember exactly where we are there. But they're all in the same spot. Maybe they were all buried in the same location. And then, of course, I mentioned this, was it last week or the week before? Can someone get the horse out of the middle of the road? Look at that. And let me blow it up. You think that anything about this map excites me more than that? The horse is shown in the middle of the road. How is that possible? Did Elliott happen across Alexander Gardner selling some of his photographs and say, hey, wow, there's a horse in the road, I'll put that on my map? Or did David Will's mapping crew put the spots of the dead horses on and show the horse in the middle of the road, indicating that burial map, well, we think that photograph from Meade's headquarters, we don't know, is from like July 7th, 8th, or 9th. So that map was made at a time where the horse is still on the road, and they just wanted to indicate that.
Well, with the photographs of the Trossel farm, which came first?
Yeah.
The map or the photo?
Yeah. And in the Trossel farm, which is interesting, the Trossel farm is, we know from Mrs. Trossel that it's not until a couple weeks after the battle that they take the horses away. And then all they do is put them in a pile and light them on fire. So the horses are around for a few weeks.
I thought they were just up the big one.
And just some things on the Elliott Burial Map that you might find interesting. There's Iverson's pits.
Okay.
There are some things, and you asked this, who asked this? How accurate is the map? In some places, it's really accurate. Now again, a burial map's only going to show killed in action. And here they show 110 Confederate graves in Iverson's pits. That's killed in action. And then, obviously other soldiers are dragged away, or I said taken away, wounded, and they die in hospitals afterwards, a day after, 2 days afterwards. I think there's an account, if I'm not mistaken, by a Confederate artilleryman that's passing through the area. I think it's at Sessage, I forget which battery. But he visits the area of Iverson's Pits on July 2nd, and he says 179 Confederates are laying in, a field. I think he gives a number. But there's 110 there. Look at the dead Union soldiers at the field and in the woods, McPherson's Woods. You see where he shows Reynolds killed? I think that's fascinating. I think what I have there, 155 U.S. graves of the Iron Brigade. You know, they're probably all from the Iron Brigade, right? Northern dead. What else?
151st.
Yeah, 151st. There you go.
Go out there.
Yeah. And then
It's interesting that there's a bunch of those in the woods.
yeah, and they put some in the woods too. But most of them they dragged out of the woods and buried in the fields.
Yeah.
Probably not easy to dig in the woods with roots.
No, right.
So here, one of the people on the map is Sergeant Amos Humiston.
Yeah.
And I should point out that Elliott has map of buildings in the town of Gettysburg. Oh, here is an 1867 photograph of the warehouse along the railroad track where the monument to Amos Humiston now is. His body supposedly was found behind the fence, behind that building. And this is where the firehouse is. His body was found inside where the firehouse would now be, along Stratton Street. But the map, this is the map. I didn't have a very good copy of it. I put this in there today. This is the map of the town from the 1858 wall map. And I can just tell you, by comparing this map with the Elliott map, Elliott did not survey the town. He just took the inset on the 1858 wall map and inserted it in his map. And you can look at the buildings and see the same configuration of the buildings on his map and the 1858 wall map.
How come on that 1858 map you don't show the original road going out to where it head towards Culp's Hill?
You mean the Culp Farm Lane?
Yeah, wasn't it really the back of that alley, and then it rerouted down? It wasn't really part of
Oh, you mean down here on the end of Liberty Street?
I don't know where. So let's say Wade Avenue, starting somewhere in there.
Oh, yeah.
Baltimore Road came out,
Yeah.
and then it diverted over to somewhere past Wade Avenue, and then out Culp's Hill Lane, whatever you.
Yeah, the Baltimore Shippensburg Road. Yeah.
It
Well,
doesn't
yeah.
show it on those maps.
It kind of does. It's just Wainwright out. It doesn't go going out that far. I'd have to look at which map we're talking about. But I showed it on the Warren map in our program last week. So it's kind of on there.
Okay.
So when was Humiston identified? Not until November, right?
Yeah, Humiston's identified on there. No, I think it's late July. But,
Is that early?
yeah, but this guy somehow had access to that and put it on that map. That brings up a good question. He mentioned Humiston's body is unknown until after the photograph is distributed, and then his wife learns of the photograph, and then his wife would have had to reported that to the burial committee, and then the burial committee put it on their map. How long could have that must have been in August or, before they could have put that on the map. You know what I mean? And then here is Sharpsburg. Here's a question I have. I'm not, again, I'm a Gettysburg historian. I don't know when the first map of the town of Sharpsburg appears anywhere. We know we got the one from Gettysburg from the 1858 wall map. Is there a Washington County map that shows Sharpsburg, and he got that from that map? What do you get the road system? And then also, what's really interesting is on the Antietam map, there's a guy up here named Adams, John Adams, I think, 155th Pennsylvania. And I use that for the Pittsburgh Civil War Roundtable because he's from, the Allegheny County unit. He died in October of 18. He died in a hospital and was buried like a month after the battle. Yeah, like in October '62. So he's shown on the map. So some of the burials are post-battle burials. And then what really blows my mind, again, is there's some features that are unique to the map. Now again, they're probably not unique to the map. They're probably unique to the notes or maps that were drawn by David Wills or the Antietam Burial Committee that Elliott was using. But we can tell you that some of the stuff he's not copying from another map, he's copying from those notes. The Watts farm. Lloyd Watts grew up in a farm right where the Confederate observation tower is on Confederate Avenue. The Longstreet Tower. And that house was there. And we know it's there because it's on the Elliott Burial, the John Batchelor isometrical map. And we've also researched the property, and we know where that house stood. And we know that house was there. But it's not on the Warren map. It's not on any of the other maps mentioned by name. The house must be torn down by 1869 because it doesn't appear on those maps. And yet there it is on this map. And it just, it's crazy. And that's, I should mention, he is, Valentine Watts, the father of the family, was a Marylander, theoretically a slave, that moved into Adams County and brought his family and had a little house at that site, and then he died prior to the war, and his son moved into Gettysburg and is a USCT buried over here in Lincoln Cemetery, Lloyd Watts. And then in Antietam one, the Hauser's Ridge. You ever go to Antietam at the Visitor Center, and over there's Hauser's Ridge where the Confederate artillery was lobbing shells into the Union line, and where Lee rides up amongst the troops on Hauser's Ridge? They showed us the Grove Farm. And I couldn't understand this for a while. And then I, started researching it and found out that there was that Mrs. Hauser had died, how's it go? And no, a Hauser had married a Grove. And the widow Grove lived there. Now, she had died prior to the Battle of Antietam, but her niece had married another Hauser, and that Hauser was living there at the time of the battle, and we call it Hauser's Ridge. But on this map, they used a name of the farm from like the 1850s. And in the service records of the Confederates of Semmes Brigade that are killed in the battle and buried just north of this farm, in their Confederate service records, it says they're buried at the Widow Grove house. And there had been a long controversy amongst Antietam historians, that's a really nerdy argument, about where these Confederate soldiers of Semmes Brigade were buried because no one could figure out where the Widow Grove house was. And then this map appeared, and we realized that the Grove Farm is just simply the Hauser house, Hauser's Ridge. And that this line of bodies is the line of bodies of Semmes Brigade. And there's actually a map drawn of the bodies of Semmes Brigade, and people were trying to figure out from the map where exactly that was, and now we know. Which is, again, I thought was amazing. Now, look at the Rose Farm, or let's say specifically the wheat field on the Elliott Burial Map. So here, I'm just assuming somebody gave up. It says 500 rebel graves. And then, 500 rebel graves? I know that I'm fond of saying that the wheat field is the bloodiest spot on the entire battlefield, and literally, you could walk across the field by walking on the bodies of the soldiers. And here's an illustration of that exact fact. But that's not very accurate, and that's too many dead. And again, we have dead in the battle, and then we got guys dying in the hospitals afterwards around the town. And so this doesn't really account. This is way too many dead in that location. So, but still, it's really cool, isn't it? And of course, I should mention, since, for the listeners of Addressing Gettysburg, that the wheat field is the bloodiest spot in the bloodiest day of the bloodiest battle in the bloodiest war in American history. Okay, I say that, this is one of my things I say to the 8th graders. I have these things I like to tell the 8th graders, even if they're not true. Okay. There's nothing wrong with being deceitful to 8th graders.
Make it interesting.
For the deaths after the battle from the hospitals. Take, for instance, the Spangler Farm. Do these maps show?
In somewhat. That's a good question. He's referring to a KBI field hospital, and a lot of people die around it. Is that shown on the map? For the most part, no. But check out Camp Letterman. They show the dead at Camp Letterman General Hospital on the Elliott Burial Map. So obviously, this is after, Camp Letterman closes, and look at all those dead at Camp Letterman. So yes, in some places, no in others. Yeah. And I think if I remember correctly, and this is off the top of my head, and I don't have access to an intern that has been able to do this, but I think there's 8,000 check marks on the Elliott Burial Map, like 8,000, as opposed to 5,000 at Antietam. In the bigger scheme of things, that's pretty cool. I tell you what, William Frascinuto was excited about this map. And you ever see Bill get really excited? Interesting.
Do you want to elaborate?
What happened was, Bill, on the front cover of his book, put this photograph. And at the National Archives, two things about it. At the National Archives, he was able to look at the original negative, and under magnification, he saw that grave appeared to say J. Marshall, 28 Pennsylvania. And then he researched the guy, found out it was John Marshall, 28 Pennsylvania. And then he went on the battlefield and he found the site of where he thought this tree was located based on the rocks around it. But all this, was somewhat tenuous. And then all of a sudden the Elliott Burial Map shows John Marshall buried at the exact spot where he said he was buried all along. I mean, something that just comes out of the blue and confirms something you strongly believed for a long time. That was what was so exciting. And he doesn't get very excited when you talk to him about anything. So another thing on the map is Burnside's Bridge. Now, I'm personally disappointed with, they could have done more, shown more bodies at Burnside's Bridge. But up near the bridge, you probably know that in the attack on, Burnside's Bridge on September 17th, 1862, the 51st Pennsylvania and the 51st New York stormed the bridge together, the two 51sts.
Because they needed whiskey.
That's right, because they wanted their whiskey ration back from that evil general, Ferraro? So, the bodies that were killed in that action were buried near the bridge. And at the very end of the row is Ed Miller, 51st New York. And sure enough, there's a photograph of those bodies along the stone wall afterwards. And it's hard to see. I took it from John Banks' Civil War blog, one of my friends. But in the middle there, the cracked negative, you can see Private Edward Miller. Wow. And there's a whole story about Edward Miller in William Frascinuto's book on Antietam, A Photographic Legacy of America's Bloodiest Day. But what's really odd is they're buried along the wall, these soldiers. And the Elliott Burial Map shows them buried perpendicular to the creek and the wall. So, what is Elliott working off of? Is he working off of a map, or is he working off of notes? And why does he only show one grave when there's others that are 10? There's all these questions. And Burnside's Bridge is called Bridge Number 3. Don't you like that? Okay, so one last thing. The sunken lane. Did you know that we talked about the 51st Pennsylvania not having whiskey rations, and that's why they stormed the bridge? The 130th Pennsylvania that fought as a sunken lane also fell in disfavor with their brigade commander. And he made them bury all the dead. And the 130th Pennsylvania, one of the companies is from Hanover, Pennsylvania. And at the Adams County Historical Society, we have a photograph of the dedication of the 130th Pennsylvania Monument at the Sunken Lane from, I think, 1904. And we did write, not just me, but several people wrote articles about the Elliott Burial Map in the Civil War Trust magazine. You can find them on the Civil War Trust website. And in my Antietam Now, Then, and Now, I have a quote from Samuel Whistler of Company E, 150th Pennsylvania, about the burying of the dead along the sunken lane. So we have a quote about the burying of the dead that, of course, this map is based upon. The weather was phenomenally hot, and the stench from the hundreds of black, bloated, decomposed, maggoty bodies exposed to the torrid heat for 3 days after the battle was a sight truly horrid and beggaring all power of verbal expression. Just over there in Mumma's Field, in one ditch, you placed 185 Confederate corpses, the one on top of the other, and covered them from sight with clay. In other ditches, lesser numbers were similarly buried. Time and circumstance forbade a more human course than this. And the account does go on and on and on. So we have specific accounts about some of the burial of the dead at Antietam. But, people are still working with this map. It's not been available too long. I look forward to seeing all the interesting articles and theories about the battle that are going to come from the map. That's one of my favorite things. But I just can't wait until, if I'm not mistaken, it will be this next September when the Visitor Center will open to the public. Now, right now, Antietam is announcing the fall of 2022, and theoretically, September 17th, is that still the summer, technically?
Yeah, I think it's
But you'd think that they would shoot for being open on the anniversary coming up. And I can't wait to stand in front of the Elliott Burial Map on their museum wall. So the find could not have come at a better time for the museum designers who were actually in the process of putting that wall in. So I'm excited to see what it looks like. Well, thanks for coming to the program. And we are going to do a program next Sunday. I'm not really going anywhere. It might not be the best program because it's good for audio, because it's going to be I'm going to show a slideshow on commercialization of the battlefield. So we're going to look at all my photographs of the Gettysburg Electric Trolley, the Springs Hotel, things like that. Hotels around Gettysburg, and early battlefield guides giving tours to the public. Okay, well, thanks for coming.
Good job, Doug.
Okay, well, thank you.